A chance of rain, lows mid-30s to mid-40s. Tomorrow, rainy at times and breezy with highs near 50. East of
Welcome to the Wednesday, January 14, 2015 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. I want to remember that the city suffered a traumatic event over the weekend. Many of us are grieving. The Unitarian Church is open all week from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. for anyone who is feeling stressed or needing somebody to talk to. Tonight from 7 to 9, rather than watching us, you could go to meet with the trauma team who's flown in to provide additional support for people who wish to participate. The church is located just up here behind the 1912 on 2nd Street. The other part of healing is to begin to return to our normal work together while acknowledging that we are each processing our grief. So thank you for being here tonight. The first order of business is election of officers for 2015. And we need to elect 3, a chair, a vice chair, and a second vice chair. I would accept nominations for chair.
I would nominate Nels Peterson to serve again as chair.
Second.
Thank you. Are there other nominations? I corresponded with Wendy, who couldn't be here tonight during the break, and she indicated she was not interested in serving as chair this time. She also indicated she would be interested in continuing as vice chair if that was your pleasure. So, no other nominations for chair? Close the nominations. All in favor of Nils Peterson serving as chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Next, we need to elect a vice chair.
I would nominate Wendy.
Wendy, thank you.
Move. Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to nominate Wendy. Any other nominations? All right, I'll close the nominations for vice chair. All in favor of Wendy serving as vice chair, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? And note that the motion passed. I'm not sure how everyone voted. Nels, you seemed to be silent.
I was silent. I voted yes. I thought just sitting there would get a yes.
It was enough.
You're alive.
Thank you. And then we have in the past had a second vice chair who serves in the absence of the other two. And in my tenure in that role, I think I served once, so I think it actually does happen. This past year,
I've served occasionally as second vice chair.
you've served as, and have you ever had the gavel?
Yes.
Okay. Are you willing to?
No, I'm not campaigning for.
You're not campaigning. He knows which end of the gavel to hold, but he's not
Hey,
campaigning.
Joel.
Yeah, I'll nominate Joel anyway.
I've served as chair of this for 2 separate periods over my long tenure.
Okay.
So
Okay, so you know how to hold the gavel. Would you like to nominate somebody else? Are there other nominations? We have Joel's and a second, I believe. Okay, hearing none. All in favor of Joel serving as second vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions.
thank you, I guess.
All right, with that. The next item is approval of the minutes of December 10. Where'd they go? I saw one typo, I think. And it was only a typo, if I can find it, yes. On page 3 of 4, the 4th paragraph down begins, Obermeyer asked. The 3rd line begins, driven by the neighbors. And Obermeyer said that was another reason, 2, for the CUP. I think 2 should be stricken there. It should be another reason for the CUP.
having missed the meeting, I found the minutes excellent.
Would you be willing to
I'm
make a
willing
motion
to
to
move.
advance them?
Well, I suppose I shouldn't have.
I move that we
Thank you.
accept the minutes of December 10.
Okay, I think you can, even though you were here. It advances today's business.
Find other ways to go.
All right, we have a motion to accept the minutes of December 10. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Deb, thank you. So, motion and second. Any other discussion or correction? All right, all in favor of the motions with the noted correction, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain?
Joel and Gregory. All right. Thank you very much. Correspondence.
None from staff.
None from staff? Okay. John, do you know anything about status of appointing a new member? We have a
No,
vacancy.
I don't. I talked to Bill about it,
Okay.
and he is in the process of talking with some people, but he caught that flu
Oh,
that's been going
sorry to hear
around.
that.
So the amount of time that he's been spending in the office and the amount of time that he's been doing just what he has to do, and other than that, he hasn't been doing as much. And so I think this is week number 2, and it's been, I guess, lasting about 2 weeks. So sometime at the end of this week, he'll probably get going again, and hopefully he'll have somebody by the next meeting.
Okay.
But I can't
He
guarantee
looked
that.
pretty good today.
Okay.
I met with him today, and I think he is alive and well. He made it across the street by himself, so I think
Okay. So just for the interest of our audience at home, there is a process on the city website that you can use to apply to serve on any commission, including this one. And it sounds like you may still have an opportunity to serve here if you act quickly. The other item I thought I'd just throw into correspondence, last year you agreed to try a process that we've called shared readings, and I'd like to hear any input. Should we continue it? Should we discontinue it? Should we change it? Any sort of thoughts that you have on the matter?
I think we should keep going. I found it very valuable. We
Okay.
don't always have time to get to it, but it's, even if we can't discuss it, it's good to have the readings there to look at. I've learned a lot that way.
Okay, thank you.
I'll continue to mean to get to it.
Okay. As long as it seems valuable, I think.
yeah, I think we should always be thinking about an educational function. We've done, over the past years, we've taken different approaches to it, and I really like it, and, it is, sometimes you get to it or not, but just to even bring up the issues and lay them out on the table, put your mind in a little different place. I think it's a really good thing to do, because I like to let the citizens realize that we're not just rubber stamping anything that happens, that we are trying to think about the way our city functions and what the vision of our city should be. So I think it's excellent, Nels.
So I would welcome either specific readings, if you see something that you think that we should share, or topics, if you think of there's something that you would like me and staff to try to look for some readings on, either of those. And turning to the camera, he says 2 readings have been sent in by members of the public, and certainly welcome those. I'm not sure that we've read either of them yet, but they're in the queue of things that have come in. So, and I'm aware of the public reading a number of the things that we put out. So, sounds like you're interested in continuing, and we'll work on putting together another group. All right, thank you. Next up, Joel is Transportation Commission.
The Transportation Commission met last week, Thursday. The main topic of discussion was the multimodal transportation report, and the Transportation Commission is in the process of looking through the various kinds of action items that are in the report and trying to decide which of these might be priority items for the Transportation Commission to either study or take some action on. So that's an ongoing process, and we're in the process through the web of trying to do some ranking on some of these items. The next meeting will be the second Tuesday of February at 4 in the afternoon, and I have not yet seen an agenda for that one.
Okay, great. Mike, do you know if that full transportation report is up on the city's website?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay. For a while before it was adopted, it wasn't. And
For a while, the appendices were not present, but I think, at least as of last Tuesday, the report was present, and staff promised to figure out what the problem was with appendices.
Okay, great. Just in case our audience at home wants to catch up on that report. All right, next, the open microphone, period at which members of the public may speak to the commission regarding matters that are not on the agenda or currently pending before Planning and Zoning Commission. Any takers to come to open microphone? All right. Next item is review of the draft ADU amendment.
Well, just wanted to pick up where we left off last time, at our last meeting, December 10th of last year. Basically, we had gone over survey results from our survey from October of last year. And so for members that may have been absent, or just a refresher since it's been over a month since that meeting, I just wanted to briefly kind of go through the aggregate data that was received from that survey. Out of that, 67% of respondents lived in single-family dwellings. Response rate, 71% owned their homes within the sample. 63% supported allowing ADUs in their neighborhood. 18% disagreed. 16% neutral. We also had a fairly even distribution across all age ranges, fairly evenly distributed. Respondents' reasoned for adding an ADU to their property, should they want one. The highest was rental income, came in at 37%. An elderly family member was next at 25%. For yourself, so you yourself living in an ADU and then possibly renting your house out. And then a disabled family member came in at 7%. We also had 20% interested in adding an ADU to their property. 42% disagreed that they, at that time, they would not add an ADU to your property. 31% were neutral, probably meaning that they may or may not, should circumstances change in the future, possibly add an ADU to the property. 53% of the respondents supported allowing ADUs as a permitted accessory use in all zones. 33% of those disagreed. We had 17% neutral. 48% support allowing ADUs as a conditional use in all zones. So you had a little bit of variation between people that were interested in just permitted accessory use by right and then permitted as a conditional use within all zones. That's why you see these numbers go down from the numbers in the beginning about allowing those in your neighborhood. So we had 63% that just, that's probably the most common thing that is your neighborhood. 76% support ADUs as a permitted accessory use in R3, R4. 8% disagreed with that statement, so pretty overwhelming support for R3 and R4. We had 62% support within R1 and R2 zones, and only 21% disagreed with that statement.
This was not differentiating by where the respondent lived.
We did do that in the results, but this is the aggregate.
Yeah, this is the aggregate.
This is everybody. Yep. Important elements to everybody were owner occupancy, off-street parking, maximum occupancy, and maximum size. And at the time, the commission directed staff to prepare an ordinance basically with the following elements. Allowed by right as an accessory, permitted accessory use within R1, R2, R3, and R4 zones. And also to include specific ADU standards within the code, to limit the size to 600 square feet or 40% of the square footage of the principal dwelling, whichever's less. Is what we discussed before, limiting it to a maximum occupancy of 2 occupants, and having owner occupancy, so the owner reside on the property, whether in the accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling, and also include an off-street parking space of at the rate of 1 space per ADU, and this is addition to the single-family dwelling. So single-family dwelling would require 2. That should already be on site, and this is another, so a total of 3 if you were to choose to put an ADU on your property. So that brings us to the draft ordinance, which has been included in your packet. Kind of the first part of any ordinances is a whereas statement, and that basically lets the reader know the intentions of why you're passing the ordinance or why you're recommending the code be changed to allow ADUs. And so just wanted to go through these statements because they are important to the reasons why we're doing this. Looking at our comprehensive plan, we have a whole chapter on housing, and that is to provide a mix of housing for a diverse population is really what that's intended to do. And it's supposed to meet the economic and lifestyle needs of this diverse population. And so accessory dwelling units provide these options and choices that respond to varying income levels, changing household sizes, lifestyle needs, and accommodate a broader range of accessible and more affordable housing units. And so they further that section of the housing portion of the comprehensive plan. Also a portion that states to develop ADUs while preserving character of neighborhoods. And so, right there in our comprehensive plan, it's directing us to look at accessory dwelling units in areas that are going to preserve the character of the neighborhood, and for the most part ADUs do that, and that it still remains single family. It's an accessory use. There's really no changing to the principal structure, and it supports that goal. So, and we also have a chapter on land use and community character, statements that are goals that have land uses meet community needs while preserving agricultural land. And so with the addition of ADUs, you're not growing outward, you're densifying the city and the core, and it's more inclined to preserve that agricultural land on the outskirts of the community. So have some language in there that supports that goal. Community and mobility. Transportation systems, safe and multimodal transportation. So if you think about it, same thing. The city's not growing outward. We're using existing street and roadway networks. Existing transportation options are already available. If you develop ADUs closer to the city core, you're more inclined to make a modal shift in transportation, whether it be walking, bicycling, taking mass transit, some of those other options instead of driving. Also have the U.S. Census Bureau reporting that by 2029, more than 20% of the U.S. population, predominantly baby boomers, will be over the age of 65. So that's important to consider as we plan for future growth and just to consider that demographic in Moscow. And I also wanted to open it up at this time to any other thoughts that the Commission was thinking of, the reasons why we're preparing ordinances for ADUs at this time.
Okay, so any discussion on the whereas clauses? Much longer than we sometimes have.
I don't know if this really fits in in whereas clauses, but as you were reading through there, I just got to thinking, what if potentially the use of ADUs went way up? Then how does that affect, I'm thinking particularly R1, R2, which single family neighborhoods, now suddenly they really might not quite fit that description anymore. Are we undermining current definitions if indeed this just blossomed? And
Deb, I appreciate the question. I think I'd like to hold it till we come to the discussion of the because there we're making choices about by a CUP, for example, as a mechanism.
okay.
And focus on the whereases as the broad rationale. I think that's what Mike was trying to lay out
Okay.
for doing it at all.
I think, and I think we've already spoken to it, but the idea of trying to cope with the changing world is important in my mind, as opposed to trying to, and I'm sort of responding to we had a view 30, 40 years ago that R1 was this way, but the world shifts under our very feet, and I think it's important that we're, in small ways, we're not going to change our residential nomenclature, but the way, just in my lifetime, it's been Dad and Mom and Dick and Jane and Dog Spot. Boom, we thought that was always the way, but now we're getting down to 2.6 people living in houses. It's changed, and so I think there's a need to realize that there's a shift. We're not for people living in a house anymore, or 5 or 6, unless maybe some communities. But the national figures showed that. So I kind of think we've edged on that. But trying to keep pace with a changing world is a thought, and I'm not sure what part of that changing world to deal with, but the number of people that live in that make up a family, at least when I started in school 50 years ago, it was just assumed that there were roughly 4 people in every family, and now we're not even close to 3.
So
that means that the way we house ourselves is somewhat different. Even though as we've gotten richer, we've built bigger houses even for the 3 people or 2.5 people. We now seem to, I admit that, but I'm convinced, at least I was talking to a important real estate person today on the streets of Moscow, and he said the people that built those big houses may be in for a shock. They may not ever see the kind of money out of that house that they had dreamed of. And the point I think he was trying to make is that 4,000 square foot house that they thought was worth a bunch of money isn't going to be as valued. And that was just his point. He says, I don't think I'll be selling any big fancy houses in the next year, even though this has been a good year for me. And so what the ADU thing does is it tends to do a little bit of that smaller, better routine that we...
So, Joel, just a second. So before we go on, are you suggesting in those comments that staff might think about another whereas clause that is talking... There's one that talks about demographics in terms of age, on the age. But I heard perhaps you were suggesting changing demographics, family size, family character.
We don't refer to that specifically, and I'm just saying that's all you have to do is just go look up the figures, and it's pretty surprising when you try to think of talking about density, because the 4 people per household just doesn't work anymore. We've done a lot of things that are to change that, and apparently having less children is one of those.
So perhaps, Mike, you'd consider whether there is another kind of reason that follows along the lines of Nels's comment.
I hadn't put any thought in, and if I could think of anything, I'd try and email it to you, Michael. But it just comes to me as I look at these number of whereases that it's hard to know what the changing world is, because just when you think you know, it changes on you. So I don't know that I'm absolutely correct on that. I know that I was just looking at my journal 3 years ago. I saw that I paid $4.11 for gas, and I said to myself, we'll never see another less than $4 gas price. And I bought gas yesterday for $1.95. So that goes to say that I'm not a seer about these things. But we were in my student classes, we were talking about peak oil. And I wouldn't bring up peak oil in class today. It'd be silly for me. I didn't know the word frack 10 years ago. Now I do.
Joel, I think you had another...
No, I was just going to agree with Deb, and I think it probably would be appropriate to sort of leave the whereases until we figure out exactly how we address the CUP issue. And if depending on how we do that, some of the whereases might change.
Okay.
If the one thing I would observe is that there were 20% people sounded vaguely interested in doing AADU. It doesn't look to me like there's a rush to the market. People aren't absolutely pounding on the door for that. So I don't see a dramatic change that would happen.
Shall we take Joel's suggestion, let Mike continue, and then we can see whether there are other whereases or change ases, the case may be.
All right. Well, getting into the individual zoning districts, we had talked about R1 through R4. In discussing this with other staff, we really felt that there's probably really no compelling reason why we shouldn't include ag forest, farm ranch, and suburban residential. Ag forest, you have a 40-acre minimum. You have a lot of agricultural uses within that zone, and having an ADU in somebody's house or accessory structure really wouldn't cause any impact on adjacent properties, and really farm ranch, 20-acre minimum, suburban residential, an acre minimum. We felt that we could add those zones to the list of zones that included ADUs. And so basically changed the language under accessory, or added language under accessory structures. In uses and structures, we added accessory dwelling unit subject to the specific use standards of this code. And so we incorporated that in each of those zoning districts. Looking at R1 through R3, we eliminated the need for accessory living quarters serving as a guest house or domestic servant quarters. So we kind of had antiquated terminology there, and we define a guest house, which I'll cover a little bit later at the end in the definition section of the zoning code, but really just similar to what an ADU is intended to do, and so there's really no need to have a guest house in there anymore, and so we had eliminated that through those three zones. And then we got to basically chapter 6 of the zoning code, accessory building setbacks. So we have a portion there that allows you to build basically 5 feet from the rear property line, 5 feet from the side property lines, so long as there's certain conditions met with the accessory structure. And so these are buildings greater than 200 square feet in size. Basically, it limits you to the top plate height currently of 10 feet. We had discussed previously the challenge in creating livable space above an accessory structure with this current limitation. So basically, you have a 10-foot wall height for where the eave, from grade to where the eave comes into the structure. And so, once again, really found no compelling reason to draw a distinction between other accessory structures and ADUs within an accessory structure. And so what we're doing is proposing to change just the standard language from 10 feet to 14 feet there, and gain that 4 feet of elevation for the structure in order to accommodate living space possibly above a garage. Currently, we don't address dormers within this section, and so it's been a real challenge, at least for staff, in order to provide guidance to people looking at even building accessory structures. And so I wanted to add this provision in here for dormers, that they can exceed the 14 feet top plate height as long as they don't exceed 50% of the length of the wall. And so, once you have one that goes all the way, it basically becomes just a continuation of the wall. And so we wanted to put the 50% limitation on that to allow for dormers and allow for light, air circulation, and more livable space on top of these accessory structures. And so we had changed this within the accessory building setbacks section of the code. I think brings us to the definition section. We added accessory dwelling unit within this section, and the definition we came upon is a secondary dwelling unit that is accessory to a single-family dwelling on a single lot. I wanted to specify that so people didn't think they were maybe eligible if they had a duplex or maybe a multifamily unit. Containing complete housekeeping facilities in which is added to, created within, or detached from the principal dwelling unit and subject to the specific use standards of the code. And a portion of this follows the HUD definition. So we thought that was nice to be more in compliance and consistent with the housing and urban development definition. And it was mainly the added to, created within, or detached. And so I think that covers all of the options that someone could think of with an ADU on a property. We eliminated the guest house that I discussed earlier, and that was a detached structure being accessory to a single-family dwelling with not more than 2 bedrooms, having no kitchen facilities, in which shall be used and or designed for use primarily by guests and or servants for sleeping quarters only. So really just an antiquated definition. We only had it in R1, R2, R3. And it was really ambiguous what you could or could not do. Most people just wanted to add a kitchen in there and use it, for maybe guests that come and stay on a temporary basis, or use it similar to an ADU is intended to be used. And so, really didn't see any reason why we should have that in there still. It just would create confusion. So we eliminated that.
By eliminating guest house, do you all of a sudden create the situation where you've got lots of properties that are out of compliance because they already have a guest house?
I don't think you do. I think that what will come along is we're going to address short-term rental of property. And there's some out there, Airbnb, I think in the backyard of some houses they have some similarity like this, but basically they'd be non-conforming, and so they'd be grandfathered in if they weren't, that type of use wasn't allowed. But most of the people would just go towards an ADU, and it's not to say that you have to have housekeeping facilities in it. So you could still probably use it the same way as a guest house, and just not go to the extent of creating a full kitchen in there, and so you'd still be exercising that option for people that maybe already have something like that.
Greg, do you think the guest houses that you're aware of are larger than 600, do you think?
I'm not really aware of any in particular, but I know that, particularly in Fort Russell, there's a lot of houses. And I don't know if people are using those like that, but I just think of other times where we've dealt with situations now where somebody eliminated a definition way back when, thinking, oh, this will be no big deal, and we get all of these properties all of a sudden are out of compliance.
The guest house didn't say a size. We're now talking about a size feature. I was just wondering if I know some things that I would have called accessory dwellings, but I don't know if they were guest houses or not, over garages and things as such.
I guess it raises a related problem. We, I think, all know of some or suspect some apartments in the basement kind of operations which are maybe trying to fly under the radar at present, which might become classified as ADUs when such a provision exists. But again, if they are non-compliant in some way, for example, larger than 600 square feet, what happens? I think Gregory's raising the question, are we creating a new problem in these non-compliant things if we strike guest house? And so I'm just sort of wondering, how will we understand that?
I know of very few that are out there. Within the apartment in the basement, basically it'd be non-conforming right now, so even if it's in a zone that wouldn't allow that, they'd be allowed to continue its use. If the structure is ever destroyed or burns down, they would have to rebuild in compliance with the current regulations. But somebody that maybe has a basement apartment that's a little bit larger, they could do certain things, create a storage area, wall off a portion of it to get 600 square feet or under. And so there's a lot of things. You typically we don't include storage areas within total square footages, and so there's a lot of things that you can do to get that down and in compliance. And so I don't really see that as a large issue. A lot of times we have duplexes within single-family zones, and the only way to get financing on those is to convert it into a single-family dwelling, and so that's a lot larger of a scale of a remodel of a house in order to bring it into compliance, and I would see something like you describe as fairly easy and simple to do for somebody that wishes to do that.
Okay. So, Deb.
The part about remodeling, that's what I think of it as, whether if you were adding on to an existing building or you were changing the use within a building, like you converted your garage to this unit. Why, I'm thinking, even if the CUP process were in place, why would someone have the incentive to do that as opposed to just say they wanted to do a remodel within an existing envelope or an addition to their house, and then grandma's going to live in there, and do we have anything that says, well, you couldn't remodel and have an extra bathroom and another kitchen? Or does that make sense? It's like, well, people could kind of do all of that anyway, right? Or not? Does that make sense?
Within an ADU?
No.
No, just like if
the current environment, Deb decides she's going to convert that back bedroom and add on a little kitchenette.
And another bathroom. And why couldn't I just do that as a remodel, and my mom moves in and nobody, I mean, there's nothing to preclude me. It's like it doesn't even bring this into play, right?
Because you're going to pull a building permit.
Yeah, you just get a building permit. Yeah. So why couldn't you do that with a building permit?
But in the plan review for the building permit,
yeah, I mean,
it's just kitchen in there.
Yeah, I mean,
so
usually
People have mini kitchens in various locations in houses.
Lots of people have second kitchens.
Yeah, the way we draw a distinction between single family and two family is typically the kitchen, but as well as designed to be lived in separately. And so, if you have a house and you just want to add a kitchen to a portion of it, another kitchen, then typically we would just have you sign some type of document that's recorded on your basically deed that says you have to use the dwelling as a single-family dwelling. And so you could still have that option because our definition of family includes, relatives living there.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it could be any number of related individuals are allowed to live in a single housekeeping unit. Basically, 2 unrelated individuals and however many related to them meet the definition of family. 4 unrelated individuals meet the definition of family. So as long as you're abiding by the definition of family, we would allow you, and one portion wasn't cut off. So if your mother didn't have a separate entrance, and there was a wall between basically your area and theirs, as long as there's communal space between the two, then you're living as one single housekeeping
So it
unit.
sort of precludes that in this whole ordinance in that situation. This wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, that would be allowed, but if you wanted a separate dwelling unit, you'd go through the accessory dwelling unit in order to achieve that. That's kind of the distinction, is the separation.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that that you could accomplish what you want to accomplish without having it separate.
Yeah.
Separate in a technical sense.
Yeah. But as far as the guest houses, we've always had those within conditional use permits within the code. And so it requires Board of Adjustment, public hearing, and it runs with the land. But we have documentation, and I'm not aware of any. I know one recently that's been denied when they had tried to do something similar to an ADU through a guest house. But I don't know of any others that have gone through that CUP process in order to get a guest house. So I think we'd be fairly safe getting rid of the guest house provision.
So that would be my question only is, so it seems like what the guest house is essentially a detached bedroom, or a separate bedroom. So is there a requirement that an ADU would have a kitchen?
Containing complete housekeeping facilities. I think it would probably be there, unless there's a building code requirement that they have one. Obviously they're going to be required to have a bathroom, if it's going to be another unit. Some type of cooking facilities, I'd imagine, would be required per the building code. But to the extent of which, is probably pretty minimal.
Yeah.
All right, so I think, good question, Gregory. Are we creating a new problem? I think you've answered no. Let's carry on.
And then we define tourist home, which we don't use in the code. So it's currently within no zoning district that we have residential or commercial, and so we just have a kind of a definition of a use hanging out there. And basically that says a private residence having not more than 3 rooms for hire to transients for only sleeping accommodations and whose trade is seasonal in character. And so we were proposing to eliminate that. You run into an issue with an exclusionary zoning code if we don't have, we define that use, but we don't have it listed in any of the zoning districts. The exclusionary zoning code is that if it's not listed within a zoning district, it's not allowed in that zone. And so, somebody may have some type of variation of use that's similar to this that would fall under a different use category in our code, but, that's where you get into issues of prohibiting something specifically by defining it, but not putting it within a certain zoning district and allowing it. So we're just proposing to eliminate that as well.
So would this be possibly a B&B type of?
Well, we define bed and breakfast,
Okay.
and I mean, I don't know what that would be personally.
Big family?
Yeah, agricultural use, whose trade is seasonal in character, during harvest time maybe, that is the reason why it ended up in there, but...
And it's currently unreferenced. It just
it's not
says
referenced in any
definition.
of the zones, so...
Okay.
So that brings us to the specific use standards. We included these within Chapter 12, which is the specific use standards section of the zoning code. Basically, we have a statement of the applicability and purpose of ADUs. So we begin with that, and then we go into the specific standards. And then, in general, it must meet all district zoning regulations. So just the underlying zoning district where the property is in is proposing to add an ADU. It must meet all zoning districts unless specifically stated within another portion of the zoning code or stated herein with the specific standards. And the minimum lot size for a single-family dwelling within that zone must be met as well. And so I think we had talked about this before and analyzed, the different zones. I remember Bill had brought up a map that looked at square footages of properties and how many may be excluded because they don't meet the minimum lot size but have a single-family dwelling on it. And it wasn't that many of them, but we can discuss this, and this can always be changed, but typically within ADU ordinances, they don't specify that it needs to meet the minimum lot width. It's just they specify that it needs to meet the minimum lot size, at least for a single-family dwelling. And so, if you were in zones that were allowed for duplexes or multifamily, we don't want to confuse anybody to, if you had to say that, you needed to meet the minimum lot size for a duplex in order to have an ADU. That's why we specified single-family dwelling on there. And so, that's what I think we had discussed before. I think the commission was fine with that, and that's what we had proposed here. But certainly, if we wanted to discuss it anymore, we can. And pretty easy to take that out of there if the commission feels we shouldn't have it. We go on to size. Once again, limiting the square footage of the accessory dwelling unit to 600 square feet, or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever is less. Limiting the maximum occupancy to 2 occupants within the ADU. And then owner occupancy got a little bit more complicated because of the restrictions that we needed to add. Needed to have a deed restriction that the owner reside on the property within their accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling. That would need to be reviewed by the city attorney and then recorded against the property. And then we define that owner resides at the property longer than 6 months in a given year. And then we also go on to say that owner occupancy may also include a named natural person with an ownership or benefit in a private trust, but we exclude corporate trusts within that. And we also allow for the community development director can issue a waiver on this requirement for temporary absences. Then we state military service, employment sabbatical, or family medical leave qualified. So those would be, basically examples that the director would be able to issue waivers to and allow an extended leave for the property owner. We also open it up to waivers other than the reasons that we described within that section could be reviewed and approved by City Council. So there's a safety valve there for other reasons that we haven't thought of within the code. So, and we also state that if owners are unable to reside on the property, only one dwelling may be occupied. And so at that point, if the property sells, and it's going to be a rental property, then they just have to work through the city and pull permits and either make that space another use that's allowed within the zone, or basically convert the space into a single-family dwelling. And so we needed that section in there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, actually. I think that's a great little protection.
A couple of quick questions about that. So let's say the owner is not residing in there and they rent it to one family. Does that mean for them to be able to use the accessory dwelling unit, they'd have to do something like pull out the kitchen or...
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I had a question about the deed restriction. Do you want to get through everything before we start commenting, or do you want to?
Let's take, go ahead.
Okay. I'm curious as to why the deed restriction was in there. And ask the question for a couple reasons. One, it's the only place in the code where there is such a thing that I'm aware of. It's essentially telling people, you'll put in your deed that you promise not to violate the zoning code, which they're not allowed to do anyway, deed restriction or not. The second thing I see is our code is complaint driven. Enforcement is complaint driven. Adding the deed restriction doesn't add any legal right to anybody to be able to enforce the code. Then you run into it adds expense to the process, because most people are going to get an attorney to do that. It's got to be reviewed by the city attorney, and if that goes back and forth, there's going to be attorney fees generated. And then you're going to get into a situation where you've got these ADUs with deed restrictions, and in 10 years, the nature of deed restrictions is that down the road, people forget about them and stop paying any attention to them. If we change the code, you've got a deed restriction that says, well, you're locked into this one use, regardless of what the code might allow you to do. It seems to me to be adding an element to this that is, one, not necessary, at best not necessary, and worse, counterproductive.
We don't intend for the property owner to come up with their own deed restriction. We'd work on a template that would basically be used on all properties that we, have an ADU on. And so basically all it would be is the same information, and the ownership information would change on the deed restriction. It would just be reviewed as any legal document typically is by our city attorney. They wouldn't have to hire an attorney. It wouldn't be back and forth. And then, at any point, we'd keep a copy in our office as well. It's mainly just a means to keep track of ADUs, and just another kind of safety net for us in order to be able to, like you said, you can enforce it just because it's in the zoning code. You can enforce it without a deed restriction.
What would be an example of a deed restriction that would be useful here? What do you mean? Imagine one.
Well, we do similar deed restrictions on properties for second kitchens. They're obviously you still have to abide by the zoning code because it's a single-family dwelling in a single-family zone, but we're allowing you to construct a kitchen on your property, but you're not supposed to use it as maybe a two-family dwelling or a duplex.
Yeah, isn't like the point of this is that you have something in the paperwork that goes with any time the house is sold, so that 3 sales from now somebody doesn't decide, hey, I got a duplex here.
Yeah, it informs the next owner of the property that there is a deed restriction on the property, and it's just another safety net for us to be able to keep track of ADUs and be able to have them not turn into duplexes later on down the road. But some deed restrictions are pretty specific. They go into the whole process of what you need to do. Obviously, if you want to get that deed restriction off the property, you would just work with the city in order to be able to make those adjustments, take the kitchen out, add the communication between the 2 units to create basically a single-family dwelling. And if the zoning code changes, you could certainly do those modifications to the house to bring it into compliance. And then if you don't need the deed restriction, have an ADU or it's converted to a single-family dwelling, then it basically just goes away. So.
Well, I see that point. I still think I don't think that it really solves any problems. Again, your deed doesn't have to say, I will abide by the zoning code in order to require you to abide by the zoning code.
Yeah.
What's to prevent somebody from going through this process, getting the deed restriction? They're free to sell the property. They could sell the property with a deed that doesn't have the restriction, and the city would never know about it.
Well, it'd be recorded at Latah County, so the next owner of the property, it would come up on the property records search, correct?
Right, but the city would never know it had been removed. it doesn't prevent somebody from selling it without that restriction. I mean, that it happens a lot that those kind of restrictions fall off.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, somebody buys a property now, if they've got the two things on there, I don't think they're going to think, oh, I've got a duplex, because when real estate agents are pretty good about letting people know, well, no, it's not a duplex, this is what it's zoned for. That's how they advertise it, that's how they list it. They can't let somebody believe, oh, I've got a duplex.
Oh, what touching faith.
Sometimes, yeah.
Actually, it's actually not. It's. I mean, realtors have rules they have to abide by, and I see the point. I understand that you want to make sure that these things stay within a certain category and not without it, don't get out of hand. But at the same time, our whole zoning code is subject to that, and I think the deed restriction is, again, unnecessary and doesn't really do anything. So.
Maybe I'm missing something, but it would seem even if the property were sold, that you wouldn't necessarily, why would you need to dismantle it if you don't use it? That would be number one, it's just there. Number two, if it's not restricted to some sort of a family member, because a lot of those respondents were talking about, oh, they like the extra rental income, and we haven't precluded that, I don't think, then in essence, as the buyer of this property, I could rent it to someone, right? As long as it stays the size that it stays and the off-street parking is still there. And so in reality, it kind of has become a duplex. At least in my mind, I think. So it might be my mom that's in it to start with, but when I sell the house, it could be somebody else's college buddy that rents it. And
I
so
think the thought was, and I do want to let Mike finish ultimately, but that the owner is occupying the property, and that was the notion. Yes, the ADU or the ADU is occupied by the owner and the house is rented, but that it's different than a duplex where the landlord doesn't potentially live there at all. And therefore, I think the intention was to keep it accessory by keeping it small and keeping it closely supervised, if you will.
And I think what Mike was talking about having to pull out the kitchen and stuff, that's if you want to pull off the deed restriction about it being an ADU.
Do that. Yeah. It's just, it seems like that down the road, it really, in the long run, it starts to look like a duplex property. Even though, because lots of duplexes, people buy them, live in one side, rent the other.
But typically
it
with
seems
a
like
duplex,
it starts to not meet the spirit of what we were hoping for, which is helping out families that need
it's
place
a small
for granted.
scale, so it's 600 square feet. If you look at a duplex, typically both sides are the same square footage. They have 2,000 on one side, 2,000 on the other. We have these restrictions. It has to be owner occupied, so at least one of those has to be. A lot of duplexes, there's really no way to divide the ownership unless you conduit or build a twin home. And so you're forced with, maybe renting out both of the units for the duplex, and instead of selling it to somebody else. And so you're basically almost always a renter in a duplex situation.
Yeah, that's what I'd say why, in a sense, they are kind of a sort of a duplex. But the big differences to keep it from being a straight-out duplex are owner-occupied, which is not relevant at all to just a standard duplex, and then the size restrictions and occupancy limits, which again are pretty much off on duplexes. So yeah, I agree, and we did talk about that. I mean, we don't want to get into the business of going and doing DNA testing on who's in the ADU.
And how do you enforce the fact that the owner's there too? I mean,
comes back to...
It just starts to get confusing, I guess, in my mind.
Okay. So, any more comment on this before we let Mike continue?
Yeah, one last little one. So a deed restriction that says that in order to use this as an owner, it has to be owner occupied. They can just drop that off when they sell it? Or does that go with the person, or does it go with the property?
It's recorded against the property.
Yeah. So,
But you put a deed restriction on there, you can take a deed restriction off. The owner, if I put a deed restriction on my deed, I can take it off.
But it's the city putting the deed restriction on the property, and so the city would have to, agree as well as the owner in order to take that off.
I don't think so. I'd be interested to hear the city attorney's perspective on that, because I don't believe that I don't believe a non-owner can put a restriction on a property. I mean, the owner can, yeah, but the owner can also take it off. But I don't think you can have a non-owner be a party to that.
So I think there's a little piece of homework for you, Mike. All right, continuing on.
Last element that we included on the specific standards was off-street parking, and that was just adding one space per ADU. So that would be in addition to the two required for the single-family dwelling.
Mike, regarding parking, there are certainly some existing homes that do not have the current required 2 spaces of parking. Would they be required to bring up to that standard and then add one?
The way our current parking standards work is that they won't. We don't retroactively go back and make you create additional spaces from what you don't have. So if you only had 1 space for your single-family dwelling, it would just be the amount of spaces in addition to that. And so, you have 1, you'd just be adding 1 for the accessory dwelling unit. And that's the way our current parking standards are written.
and that might be worth thinking about, sort of like the way you can't add on an ADU on a lot that's too small anyway, that maybe we should consider adding on if there's not, if you don't meet the parking requirements, you cannot have an ADU. You see what I'm getting at?
So, okay. So I think
Just something to think about.
Right, that's something for us to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Mike.
And that concludes the specific use standards portion of ADUs. And I just wanted to go through kind of our next steps. If the commission's comfortable, since we don't have basically less than 15 days from the next hearing between January 28th and February 11th, I would need to put the notice in basically next Saturday. And so if the commission's comfortable, I can schedule this for public hearing on February 11th. It would still give us another opportunity to review it at the next coming meeting, which is going to be the 28th. And so that was kind of our tentative time schedule right now. And then if we were to follow that, that would reach council on March 2nd, 2015. So just wanted to feel you out to see if you were comfortable with me possibly noticing it next Saturday for a hearing on the February 11th, and then we'd still have an opportunity to talk about it at the next meeting. So.
I'm going to be out of town February 11th, and I would really like to be part of that public hearing. So if there's no objection to postponing that to the last meeting, the second meeting in February, that's my preference.
So the February 25 then would be the other meeting. Second meeting, okay. I appreciate that schedule in that I do not expect to be here on the 28th. Okay. Wendy does not expect to be here on the 28th. Okay. And I think each of us would like to participate, but that your schedule meets my needs. Just a sense. I mean, obviously you don't know everything about your lives, but do you generally think that you could meet one or the other, February 11 as proposed or February 25th as Gregory has requested? Yeah. It doesn't do any good if we move it for Gregory if it excludes a whole bunch of other folks.
I'm good for either.
You're good for either. Okay. Okay. Then, unless, Mike, there's some pressing reason I prefer to acknowledge Gregory's request.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So, I think we have a
So we think that moves it to the 25th?
Yes. At least adding 14 moves that to the 25th, whether there's any other logistics that staff will find, I don't know, but.
We'll let you know, but I'm sure that'll be fine.
Okay. So we have the simplest question that we could ask ourselves, we're already starting to ask, which is, should we schedule this for hearing? But I think that there's been some conversation amongst us already. Is there any other tweaking that we wish to do? And you have some comment there. Let me lay out the other piece is, we have a member of the public here, and we have an email that was sent to staff that the email was requesting to be included into our conversation tonight. Each of those could also influence both the tweaking that we might wish to do, and I suppose could even conceivably cause us to conclude we didn't want to advance it to public hearing. But
I would defer my comment until after reading the mail, because I believe my comment is consistent with the email.
You've seen this before. Or knew it was coming.
So, perhaps what I'll do is this. I will read this letter and ask that it be included into the record. And also, it isn't clear to me, this letter is from Matthew Halliday, it isn't clear to me whether he understood that tonight was only this procedural process that we're going through. And so my request would be of staff to make sure that this gets included in the packet as part of the public hearing, so that these comments, because I'm not sure that council will dig back all the way through to find this item in tonight's meeting. So I'd like to be sure it gets up to there.
Certainly.
And then Mr. White has patiently sat through all our business so far, and I think he also would like to speak briefly, and the chair is going to acknowledge that request as well. So with that, this is an email from Matthew Halliday. It was sent January 13, 2015. Dear Bill, he's addressing Bill Belknap, Community Development Director. My wife and I cannot attend the council meeting tomorrow evening, 1/14/2014, which is a missed date, I believe, but would like you to include this email as our stance on the matter. We are against ordinance number 2014 for the following reasons. One, it will lower the value of residential housing units in R1 and R2 zones. Allowing accessory dwelling units in all zones will directly result in lowering the real estate values for previously less dense zones. Two, increasing density and congestion in R1 and R2 zones violates the character of the zones as described in City Code. It does not allow for quiet and family-friendly neighborhoods. Number three, there will no longer be a choice for single residence housing within Moscow city limits, and will force me and my family to seriously consider moving outside city limits or moving to Pullman. You cannot allow accessory dwelling units if they will violate the character or function of a neighborhood. Why introduce ordinance 2014 when perfectly viable method of allowing ADUs on a conditional use basis is already present? Sincerely, Matthew Halliday, Jolene Halliday, on Harold Street, 826. And Mr. White, would you like to come and sit at our table and share your thoughts?
Well, I think you probably just had about the same thoughts I have. I guess personally, I think
Name and address for the record, please.
Ken White, 835 Harold, Moscow. The concept of taking a single-family residential area and adding rentals, we all know that's what they even said on the survey, that more people plan to build rentals than they would having their granny or their great aunt come live with them. I guess I see the concept. Now I see where you're coming from the concept, but one thing I really disagree with is density in certain areas. people choose to live in areas that are single-family, less dense, a lot of people, not everybody, obviously, and, more family-friendly than we would be respecting, I think, as we're respecting the carrier. Right now, we have the zones, especially 1 and 2, being something that people can choose to live in, knowing that they'll be in an area that's less dense, less congested. It's more like the old time Jane and Bob Nels, same type of structure. If we make it a right for people in Zone 1 and Zone 2 to add these rental units, it won't happen overnight, but over time, more and more will be developed, and we no longer have a single-family residential zone where we have one now. I guess I would oppose the using or applying this ordinance modification to our zone R1 and R2. And I guess basically for the same reasons that you just read. Something with my pump here. I know you've been working on this a long time, and I guess I really don't know if it's going to do overall what your hope was. It'll do the densification. That was your hope, I know, Nils. But I don't think it's going to make the town of Moscow into an urban type of living. And if it does, I would guess most people wouldn't want that. So anyway,
one of my I guess questions about the dialogue. I certainly understand the concern with R1 and that choice. So that makes sense to me. I'm a little bit, one presumes that you're saying that the millions of people in America who live in apartment buildings are not family-friendly people. They're really against families and blah, 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 So to haul out that family-friendly thing, the fact that you like space doesn't necessarily make you family-friendly in my mind. So that's a word I'd prefer not to dangle, because there are people living in all kinds of places that have families, and I don't want to suggest that they're not interested in their children or what have you.
If I can, family-friendly, with my definition of that is a quieter place, less congested. Kids, if they chase the ball.
And so it's more family-friendly to be on Moscow Mountain. In other words, if you have 10 acres on Moscow Mountain, you're really family-friendly.
Well, I suppose you are, yeah.
Okay, well, just asking.
Okay. Other questions for Ken?
Yeah. So are you against the ADUs just flat out in R1 and R2, or what would you think about people having to go through a conditional use permit process to be able to do it in R1 and R2?
A conditional use permit, it's allowed right now if people wanted to, I assume, isn't it?
No,
I don't think it is.
I'd
guest
probably
house
be okay
piece
with that, and the reason is that through a conditional use permit, you set up a hearing, and your neighbors all have an opportunity to come and speak, and maybe all the neighbors in that neighborhood will like what you're doing, and but then there are neighborhoods that people wouldn't like. I certainly wouldn't in my neighborhood. I live in an R2. Does that answer your question, I guess?
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I wanted to clarify that too. So there is, you can't do a CUP currently for an accessory dwelling unit in R1.
You can't, no.
Yeah.
You could do the
You could do a
Guest
guest house,
house.
which didn't have a kitchen, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, that would be the only allowance.
Yeah.
But, you know, inherently in the definition of guest house, it's meant for short-term use, and so you wouldn't be able to rent it out for periods probably greater than 6 months because it says primarily for short-term rental.
One thing, you know, the initial recommendation or discussion, I understand, was, where is it listed, Granny and, I had 3 things written down here somewhere. If you're serving, the original goal, or one of them anyway, I understand, was serving the community for in-law, granny, or older child occupancy.
Right.
And with 53% or 50-some% already saying that they would rent it, I mean, you've already, the majority of people that propose that they might build one are doing it for rental, and so that excludes the in-law, granny, and older child thing, unless you're going to rent it to your granny, I don't know. But I think it's getting maybe getting a little off track from your original concept of what you were doing with this zone modification.
Joel, you have a comment?
I also have serious concerns about ADUs in R1 especially, and in R2, and I would add in SR. Suburban residential, well, let me back up a bit. I don't know, maybe I'm antisocial.
May I ask this first? I'm happy to begin the conversation. Do you have any further questions for Mr. White?
No more for White, except to agree with him.
Okay. So I just wanted to be sure that we had addressed our guest, and then maybe we can turn to the conversation amongst ourselves.
Okay.
You have the floor.
Okay. Maybe I'm antisocial, but I do like space. I like the low density of the R1. At the time we moved here and the time I joined this commission, R1 had a minimum lot size, I believe, of 12,000 at least. Somewhere in the ensuing years, we've reduced the minimum lot size, and I think we actually collapsed a couple of zones in order to do it. My area conforms to the lower density. It's lower than lower density than what's currently required, and I like it. The SR zone was created specifically for large lots, and presumably the people who are living in SR choose that. They want the space. I think we're toying with making major changes to the character of SR, R1, and maybe R2. I guess I'm willing to go with a CUP. I could continually have eyes on several properties in my immediate neighborhood that would be quite easy to put a ADU in the backyard, but it sure would change the character of my neighborhood. I could easily put one in my backyard, but I'm not sure that I should be allowed to. And I'm not sure that the neighbors would be happy if I did. As I say, I have serious concerns with those three zones. A CUP might ameliorate that, but.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's probably an argument to give R1 district to do it with a CUP. That certainly is a possibility. I guess my question, Joel, is, okay, if you live in an R1 zone and you decide that you'd like one of these, so what do you say to your neighbor who lives in R1 but decides he disagrees with you, and so apparently who's right and who's wrong? In other words, we're not. The city's not going to go out and say, "Oh, you guys in R1 and R2 have to build ADUs." Nobody's asking. There's no requirement. This is a person who buys R1 zone and wants to build one.
I'm only saying that my neighbors chose to live in this zone because of the character of this zone.
Well, then they wouldn't build an ADU. I don't think you have a problem.
Well, I'm not sure I have that much faith in my neighbors.
And so that was my point. You're smarter than your neighbors, obviously. And so I guess that's my question. If I buy an R1 piece of property and I decide I'd like to have an ADU for whatever reason, I'm now a bad guy. I'm not sure I see. I understand that you don't like them, but anybody at the table here can say they don't like the ADU
I'm only saying they're not consistent with the neighborhood that I moved into.
Right.
I chose to move into.
And I think I heard you say you might be willing to go with the CUP approach, and I haven't heard whether you would go there with the CUP also, or whether you would stay at by right.
Well, I'm certainly willing to listen to the CUP idea for R1, because I do think we want choices in our land and in our city. That's the cool thing about our country, is having these choices, and so I don't want to take away from those choices. And I'd be willing to discuss the CUP, but so I'm not. I'm at sixes and sevens. I haven't decided how I might vote yet, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion.
But I'd also remind you that I think the nature of the SR as a large lot development is even more so that people chose those large lots intentionally. They're expensive, certainly. So it was a lifestyle that they were choosing.
Okay. Can I would like to bring Wendy's voice back into this conversation, reading from the minutes of last meeting. McClure said in Fort Russell, R2 and R3 boundaries are intermingled, so requiring a CUP in one but not the other would seem unfair. She thought perhaps a CUP should be required in R1 only, because there R1 lots are larger and have different development patterns. When I read that as reviewing these, I then did a drive, and first I looked on the zoning map, and she is right. R2 and R3 and R4 are not quite interdigitated, but they, and an interesting drive was on Howard Street, which one section is R2 on both sides of the street, and another section is R2 and R4 R4, I believe, though it's the GTE power station and the lodge and stuff. So it's kind of an odd block. But go down Howard and then loop around and come up Polk. And now you're in R3. And it's that eclectic mix of Fort Russell houses on both of those streets, and you think, hey, if I drive down the alley, I've got 1 foot in each zone. And so Wendy got me thinking about it relative to R2 in a different way, but as I began to look at, and if you want to try a different experiment, think about Lynn and Logan. The R2, R3 line does not run on either of those streets. It runs down the middle along property lines and across properties, it looked like even, Mike. We might have some messy business in a few places. Wendy's comment about there being interwoven and might seem unfair is what I'm trying to highlight by my drive around town. There certainly was some complexity there.
I think that makes an argument for thinking about R1 a little bit separately from R2, R3, R4. I mean, our most, currently, our most revered residential area is, has no R1 in it, so we really don't, up to now, we haven't revered R1 in terms of where people want to go and see stuff. So we've got a mix of R2, R3, and R4. Strangely enough, the R4 is more in Fort Russell than you might think. So to me, it builds an argument. I think Wendy's absolutely on a track, but then I guess we've trained together and worked together and taught together, so we probably seem like Bobsy twins in a way.
If I could,
and I'm struggling as chair to figure out how I draw boundaries around. This is the sort of meeting that is pretty informal, and I'm going to welcome another comment, but trying to figure out how to draw boundaries between the commission and the public. And carry on.
I just wanted to add the concept of a neighborhood that has single-family residential housing. That's R1 and R2. R3 is multifamily, am I right?
Two-family.
Two-family. And R4 must be multifamily.
Multifamily.
So the distinction to me is R1 and R2 are both single-family residence housing, and that creates the neighborhoods, whether they're in R1 or R2, or that creates the character of the neighborhood that I think would be changed if they went wild with lower units. And like I said before, I don't think that's an immediate thing. There'll be a few people, but then down the road, though, there'll be more and more, and pretty soon you no longer have a single-family residence area or areas in Moscow. Moscow has become a multifamily with rentals, all over the R1 and the R2 that doesn't leave the choice of single-family residential neighborhoods to anybody moving in.
But again, I just want to talk about that R2, R3.
Yeah, so I think we want to take some input from the public, but I don't think we then want to begin to engage a large dialogue. Yeah.
I could
tricky balance. In a public hearing, it's pretty easy to know what's going on. Thank you, though, for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Further discussion, things we ought to think about. Yeah.
So I think one of the realities that we need to think about doing this is that we are authorizing mini duplexes. I mean, I mean, there will be
many or
mini,
M-I-N-I?
mini, yeah, mini. Because I think that comes to the biggest question. I mean, we have to assume that it's possible that whatever we authorize will end up being done to the max. The things that may prevent it from being a million ADUs blossoming is the restrictions we're putting on it. So my question would be, are we authorizing too much? I understand people that buy in an R1 and R2 because they want to be in a single family neighborhood. And now all of a sudden their neighbors on each side put up an ADU. They won't be happy about that.
Well, why did the people put them up? I'm still...
Well, that doesn't matter. I mean, if I buy my lot in an R1 because I like a single-family neighborhood...
is not anything you're going to enjoy.
I know some people won't. I can guarantee that.
Generally,
But-
go ahead.
Yeah, but so my question is, are there enough restrictions on this to keep it at a low enough level to not be terribly intrusive? That, in a way, is why I'm in favor of that parking thing. That if you don't meet, current standards for parking, you can't put an ADU in and then just add another parking spot. I think that maybe we want to make it kind of difficult to do this. Because the other reality is that, the majority of people were saying, I'm interested in this for a rental. And so you can assume that, even if they're originally built for a handicapped child or mother-in-law or whatever, at some point they're going to be a rental. I think that's pretty for sure. I'm in favor of it as, I think in general density in urban areas is good. It's better, it's cheaper, it's better than sprawl. I think that, geez, I wish this was easy. And then you just shot down the great compromise, too, of R1, R2 be a CUP if you've got...
I'm just reading the notes.
Yeah. No, I'll blame you. You're the president. I guess it seems like the CUP for R1 and R2 isn't really solving much, just because of all of the interfingering. All of the, people on one side of the street get to do it.
Mike, can you pull up a zoning map? Because I think that's not true. R1 is pretty distinctly separated.
Pretty isolated.
Is it?
But it's intermixed with R2.
It is intermixed with R2,
Yeah.
and so then
Yeah.
right. So
So I mean, that's what I'm saying is that even though that's the way zoning works, it's still, you get to have ADUs on one side of the street and we don't on this side of the street, and you're getting as much impact on the neighborhood as you would anyway.
Gregory, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, and I think I do think that the owner occupancy requirement, which is going to be in place even without a deed restriction, I think that will go, the owner occupancy requirement and the limit of 2 people. I think even if an owner builds one for the purpose of having a rental, I think that's going to mitigate a lot. The places that I can think of where there is an owner who is renting out part of their property, they just don't put up with problems. If it's the places where you have wildness going on, that you have the absentee landlords, or where they've got a bunch of rentals and there's not an owner living there. I just don't think you would see that with an owner-occupied requirement, and with 2 people, usually. Usually, I mean, sure, there's always going to be some problem, but if you've got if you have a neighbor who builds an ADU and they've got wild tenants, your neighbors were probably pretty wild and unpleasant to begin with.
I don't see how we enforce the fact that there's still an owner on the property. That's what I'm a little vague on, well, how do you do that? Whose responsibility is it to make sure there's still an owner? And lots of neighborhoods that like to think they're neighborhoods have no idea who lives next door. They can live in the same house for 50 years and you never meet the people across the street or next door. You never see them, so you wouldn't know if it was an owner or not an owner. And that's just a reality of current life, that you don't know your neighbors a lot of times. So how do we even enforce that?
I would think in practice, it's somebody going to be complaining about the keggers, and somebody will check the deed restriction at some point.
It's typically a deed restriction. We would keep record in our office. Some jurisdictions have an annual renewal system for ADUs, and so they, verify those documents, voter registration every year. Not proposing that, but those, if we have
if there's a way to do it
that's
possible, that's not too
Sort of look at the.
I'll just have the
maybe you want to
drawing
small
keep
it down,
track
but
of it.
Yeah,
look at the
there's a
R1.
limit to
Let's look at R1 areas. The over on the other side of the hill, over on the Comstock, that's one of the biggest R1 areas, and it's fairly discreet, and it mixed up with R2 at all.
Big purple.
Okay.
Purple,
And
that's
this
it.
one here.
Yeah. So there's really that's probably the largest R1 district in the whole city, if I'm not mistaken.
But there,
Up on the other side.
Ridge Road area, there's a lot of mother-in-law apartments there at one time, and a lot of them still exist.
Still live.
Yep.
And a lot of the inquiries that we get in our office are elderly couples. Maybe it's just one or two of them that are still alive, that have this giant house, and they still want to be able to live in that house, but they want to have some type of care, but they don't want, whether it be their family member that, wants to move into the basement, they still want a little bit of separation. And so, probably 50% of the inquiries that we get in a year for something similar to an ADU is that scenario. You have a large lot, you have a large house, and you've just basically, the kids have moved away, and you just, still want to stay in that house, but, really the only way to do that is, have somebody to take care of you, move into the basement, or, have somebody else help you out. So,
Mike, do we have any way of making an overlay that would actually have those existing non-compliant apartments on it, to know where they are? We all know they exist.
we don't keep an inventory of those typically.
I was just going to say, on my street, on Hayes, are we R3 or R2?
I think you're R2.
R2. Of the 5 houses between 5th and 3rd, 3 of them have apartments in them. And I don't think they're necessarily recorded anywhere or anything, but at least I know 3 families that have had that have rented or used those apartments. And so I understand the perception, but I do resent being told that I'm not a family type dude just because there are people with apartments in my neighborhood. And hello, there's 5 or 6 little kids under the age of 10 in our block. And so you understand why I'm a little bit, in other words, it's throwing out, I can discuss the argument that that maybe one of our districts should really be more difficult to have an ADU in it. I don't see in reality, while R1 and R2 may sound in the ordinance like they're similar things, in reality on the map, R2 and R3 link together more readily. They have done. if we go look at the Fort Russell district, and here you've got R1 running up, not against R2 and R3, but R4.
Yeah, I was going to comment on following Wendy's comment, but that boundary there and a lot of this boundary here
Is a big hill.
is topographic such
Exactly.
that they only abut on the
No, and
map.
that's why that happened, yeah.
Yeah. So, but now if you slide it over, so we're looking more in the Fort Russell, then, and so what? There's, your hand is on over there by the county courthouse, right, Mike?
Correct.
That's the courthouse.
There's the 1912 where the
1912.
hand is at.
And there's the
Yeah.
Got an R4 going right up the street between the
Howard, Polk.
So with a lot of
Drive,
R2 and a lot of R3,
There's the park, and there we have Hayes.
And there's Hayes, there's Nels's house. There.
right there, right? But of course, I'm not bringing up the fact that my life has been destroyed by being across the alley from a bunch of R4 people, those hideous R4 people. And you can see that it's tainted my...
Well, you chose to live there.
I did.
Chose to live there.
Yeah,
I did.
You
I
liked
knew
the
it
house and you bought it.
when it was right there. But I think
Can
the
we
people
slide
who
that
choose...
up to
Joel's
the
neighborhood?
SR?
Okay. Okay.
Most of that's up in the north.
Do you remember how many properties even fit the size restrict? Like, how many even could do this? That was one of the initial pieces of information that we had, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and pull that back up.
There weren't very many that even qualified, right? Size-wise?
Well, the majority, you have to look at what the current structures are, and we have an inventory of single-family dwelling, We don't have necessarily the non-conforming basement apartments.
Right, but like for
But-
anything new, it didn't seem like there were very many that even had the potential to do this, right? Or am I remembering wrong?
Potential based on lot size?
Lot size,
standalone.
yeah.
Well, it was,
I was thinking that there weren't very many
lot
that.
size with single-family dwellings. I think we had just analyzed R3 and R4 at the time. I don't know
Oh,
if we
okay.
went to R1.
It seems to me that the age of the house has more to do with it than the size of the lot. Because in the era when we built garages that were separate, and that's R2 and R3 in the Fort Russell district, there are quite a lot of opportunities there. If you go to R2 or R1 districts that are more modern, then you find more garages and living rooms under the same roof, and then the chance for doing a ADU is somewhat reduced, because you're going to have to build a separate dwelling rather than, let's say, building something over a garage, which is the kind of thing that we thought about. So I don't, even your neighborhood seems to be more modern, don't you think?
My garage used to be detached. The house was built in the late 40s, but my remodeling has integrated it. Mike, are these the only SR in town, or are there anything off on the east edge?
No, this is mainly
This
the
is
only
it.
SR. Yep.
Yeah,
It's way out Orchard, right?
Yeah, this is
Orchard, and
John's
then
Road.
where Mountain View takes a hard right turn.
I feel that just the opposite of some folks that have talked about SR or ag is, I think that people on a farm or in a more expansive area are more likely to build a little place next door for their grandma than almost anyone else. And so that cluster of houses often happens. Your son comes back from college, and a few years, he's 30 and he wants to help with the farm, and you build a house right close by your own home. So that clustering tends to...
I'm agreeing with that for FR and AF,
Right.
but I tend to include the SR along with as similar low density
If that's the SR, boy, that it's hard to even describe that territory. I'm not sure I know what it is.
Well, these are big houses. Big houses and big lots.
Well, there are. That's right. There are
large
some.
houses on acre-sized lots.
Yeah, they are big, aren't they?
Lots of green grass.
Yeah.
In terms of neighborhood impact, I mean, my feelings for SR is that it would be virtually unnoticeable, just because there are so few houses there now.
But it would be my suspicion is it would be ill perceived by the neighborhood, by the type of people who chose to live there.
Except that those folks don't like to be told what to do either. And if they want to build
I've
something for
occasionally
their grandma,
canvassed some of them for political campaigns and got some icy receptions.
I too, I remember putting signs out there.
All right. So I'm trying to think about how to go forward, and I want to back all the way around to a comment that you made towards the beginning, Joel, which was some of this discussion may change some of what we want to see in the whereases.
Right.
Has it changed anything for you?
Well, we haven't changed we haven't agreed to change the nature of the ordinance.
Okay.
If we put some CUP requirements in SR and R1 and maybe R2, that would change what we do in the whereases.
Okay.
Do you think that this is a big enough issue that our discussion about a CUP, let's say in R1, is large enough that we need a further discussion or not? I can't tell how big the discussion will get. I can't quite be certain of it, but since it's raised up, do we want to just forge ahead? We want to make, how do we make a recommendation if we'd like? Is there a compromise? I guess, Joel, would be my question.
Right. And I think we've been struggling towards that. I haven't heard exactly arriving at it. What I guess I imagine that we could do is, Mike has the notion of one more meeting to look at one more draft. Between now and then, think through and decide which pieces, and we'll sort of deconstruct this into somebody. So first motion says, I move to adopt the whole thing caboodle as written. Joel offers an amendment to take out SR and R1. It goes one way or the other.
Right.
Gregory offers an amendment to take out deed restriction. It goes one way or the other. In other words, I'm not sure at this point, having listened to you, even have two minds yourselves, how we can sort of, generally we've managed to arrive at some consensus, more or less. I'm not sure we're going to quite get there. John?
Generally don't speak, but I have not heard anyone say, just drop the issue. Just basically say, we've looked at this, we've discussed it, and from the planning and zoning point of view,
This dog don't hunt.
yeah, and you may not want to do that, but I'm getting, just listening, which I don't do very well, as you all know, but there are different opinions all the way around the table, and they're all valid. And that oftentimes means that different opinions that are all valid, maybe we don't need to change anything.
Actually, can I respond to that? I think the different opinions are kind of around the edges. I think we're all of a mind that we want to move forward with this. I think the question is in some of the details, and I like where you were going, that maybe what we need is another session with the draft, between now and that next session, to think about these things on our own and come back prepared to say, okay, here's what I would propose as an amendment to this.
The fact that we pushed it off helps us to have one more discussion. And now that we've had this, I think, a productive discussion, I think we're really, sometimes we have to think on it, sleep on it a little bit too.
So I would like to answer John by asking if someone would make a motion that we not drop this and continue to the rest of the process.
A motion that we not drop it.
Not drop it.
I would make a motion that we not drop this, that we move forward working on the draft ordinance.
I'll second it.
There's a second. Okay.
Yeah.
We're clear. And the point is, to answer the fundamental question, this dog don't hunt.
Yeah.
Okay. So all in favor of the motion to continue the process, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. Okay, so I think we got that in.
Okay,
that
that's,
in. Now the devil's still in the details.
Yeah.
And so what I would like then to think that we would do is not address this on the 28th when Wendy and I won't be here, but to come back on the 11th. And I recognize that you won't be here on the 11th.
I'll submit some written
Some
comments.
written comments, okay? And that then we would have a chance to take it apart and change some of the rules and pieces of it if in that next draft, and then we would have the public hearing the subsequent, the February 25, I think it is.
I'm always very slow to make my mind up about things, and it strikes me because we are all over the place with our thoughts about the details. I don't feel like I'm in any big hurry for this to necessarily even happen at the postponed dates. It's not like there's a public clamor that, boy, you better get this done in a hurry. I would be happy to drag it out for as long as it takes us to all feel really comfortable with what we come up with.
I guess I would counter.
I'm a slow thinker.
I would counter that by saying that I think we've gone through a very careful and thoughtful design and staff process. And we're at a point where we're probably not going to change each other's minds on a detail. The only way we'll deal with that detail is to just take a vote and get it on down the pike. And so my view is that we've been watching this for a year and a half, have we? And I think we've had student work on it, we've had debates on it, staff has worked really hard on it. I think it's moving well. And the fact that we're only debating a couple of small issues is quite positive in my mind. And I certainly, even though I don't want to champion the wonderful people who live in R1, I would be willing to, that's a debate I think that's worth listening to.
Okay.
So I think we should just go right ahead as carefully as we, without leaving you guys behind. Let's just go forward with this.
And I want to get a sense around the rest of the table. Are you, the two positions are represented at the end? I'm in favor of just kind of moving forward on the schedule of the 11th and the 25th.
I don't think we're going to get any new relevant information. We're going to have to make the decision based on what we got, I think. I don't see any particular reason why it can't be put off for, another couple of sessions if it needs to be, but I don't think we'll get any new information I don't think it's going to hurt anything if we do the vote on the 11th or the 28th or even the first meeting in March. I mean, year and a half, what's another month and a half?
I guess as long as we're gaining something, and yeah. Joel.
No, I agree. I think we're at a position where we're not likely to get much new information, and we're not likely to really change each other's minds very much. So I suspect we're probably going to have to do some voting on the next time it comes up.
And I've mentioned this before. I think this is a strong team, and we can disagree and go forward, and that's where we're about to sift out, I think. Okay. So, any last comments before we move forward?
One little quick question for Mike, which you got me thinking about the guest houses, existing guest houses. If you drop that out of there as you proposed, does that put somebody in the position of if their little guest house burns down, can they rebuild it?
Well, I don't know that we have any out there right now, but yeah, I mean, if it was a non-conforming use and it would to be burned down or destroyed, then it would have to be constructed in conformance with current regulations. And so, if you were allowed to do an ADU, they certainly could do that. Mm-hmm. That would be an option for them.
Yeah. Can you build one? Can you build a guest house now?
Yeah, if you get a conditional use permit within those zones.
Thanks for all your work on putting this together.
You're welcome.
So, and I charge you with whereases as well as thinking through in which zones or. All right?
And so just for clarification, do you want me to bring the same draft back and have discussion at the next meeting in January, or postpone it until the 11th before we have another discussion and then the public hearing on February 25th?
I think February 11 and February 25 and not 28.
Okay, so not the next meeting. We won't have it on the agenda.
Correct.
Okay.
And then this draft, to the extent that staff hasn't learned important things and wishes, I don't want to be bound to this if you all have thought of something else, some other whereas or some other way to look at something.
Sure.
But I don't think, I think our wrestle is R1, R2, and we may as well leave the document stable in that regard so that we're not being surprised that it's moved about.
I guess the only, and this can go for the next meeting too, if there's a way to think about a whereas that relates to the world condition that should cause us to be just a little bit suspicious of some rules that we might have made for ourselves 50 years ago, whether it's climate change, whether it's not having so many fossil fuels to deal with, whether it's just learning to be greener people. Those are things that have changed in our lifetime. God only knows they've changed since I was a kid, and we're still acting like, well, we thought of R1 back in 1926, and by God, we're not going to let that go, even though we now have 8 billion people on the face of the planet. So it seems a little flat earth-ish to me. So if you got brilliant and could think of a way, and I'll try to think of a whereas, because I think as time goes by, I've been a little bit reluctant to worry about climate change, even though Nels thinks it's a wonderful deal. And as the days go by,
For the record, I don't think it's a good deal.
I think he's right. I think that we have no business not thinking about it, even though we're in this wonderful little pocket of the universe. And so I'm just trying to get people to be just a little bit more worldly vision-ish, rather than to say we don't want. We know we're part of the world, and we're so it seems to me like it's okay to think about a little bit of change.
I'm going to invite Joel, and then we'll...
One thing that might be useful to have a bit more information on for the next time we discuss this would be some additional information on the nature of a deed restriction.
Yeah, I got that down, so we'll talk to the city attorney and I'll get an opinion.
I'm not sure if that's your pile or my pile.
I think
I'm
it's
looking,
my
where
pile.
did my
I think
agenda
it's
go?
my
But
pile.
it's this thing that's written all over is the agenda. So, and also, when we do this in February, on the 11th, we vote about the draft. If you want to vote a whereas off the island, we can do that as well. So come prepared to look at the whole gamut of the thing. Mike, let's move on to reviewing the draft light manufacturing amendment.
Okay. So attached to your packet, we have a pretty short draft ordinance. We had talked about light manufacturing the last two meetings, and so
That's the minutes.
last what we discussed was adding light manufacturing to general business as a conditional use,
That's mine.
and then shifting light manufacturing from a special use within motor business to just a principally permitted use. And the other substantive changes were just amending our definition. Currently, it's just a real broad definition stating the manufacturing, compounding, treatment, processing, assembling, packaging, or testing of goods and equipment. And then we added some nuisance language to the end of that that is primarily indoors and which does not present any adverse effect upon surrounding property from smoke, noise, vibration, dust, glare, air pollution, and water pollution. So that was really the crux of the amendments that we're proposing with light manufacturing.
I make a motion this is perfect.
I don't hear that motion yet.
I like it.
Joel.
I would be willing to second it.
Okay.
Time were appropriate.
One is just purely a typographical thing on page 1 under conditional uses, item 4, establishments providing pre-paired food. I don't know what you want to do about that, but it didn't read well to me.
Okay.
The other is I had a call from a citizen who is concerned that we continue to think about traffic kinds of issues related to this activity. And I noticed, and the reason that I saw that hyphen was that I was reading closely in the general business section here where it's instructing the Board of Adjustment on number 5 for gasoline service stations, subject to detailed review of traffic access and circulation. And down there in 7, again, it enumerates specifically concern about traffic and parking. And I wondered whether 8, light manufacturing, might also, I'm only in general business now, might also add some sort of language admonishing the Board of Adjustment to think about that particularly. And the reason that I raised that is the federal building / post office. Have you watched them put semis up to the loading dock there?
Oh, jeez.
They're good.
Oh, I'm not faulting the drivers, but they take out 2 lanes of Washington as they loop out, line up, and back in.
Grain elevator over on A Street that they just tore down was the same way.
Okay. Which is now history.
Which
Did
is
it
now
occur to
history,
you that
but-
they made the building backwards?
No,
Which
it did.
They did.
The plans were upside
think
down
so.
when they built it.
Honestly.
But-
No, I agree with you. I've stood there in amazement and watched the semis blocking off the east two lanes, trying to get a long semi back in there.
So I would like to ask staff to consider adding that. But on the next page under motor business, I was going to bring that, I'm bringing that same thought. And I said, no. Those lots tend to be much bigger, and we have examples of, and I find, at first I was doing examples that were actually large-scale establishment kinds of examples, so no. Consider Moscow Building Supply. If that were light manufacturing rather than what it is, they're bringing in big truckloads, they're turning those trucks around, they're unloading them, they're loading them, and they're doing that in motor business. I wouldn't want to say light manufacturing sitting in a comparable motor business situation should be constrained any more than, and this doesn't, this would allow it by right.
Well, yeah, in motor business, and predominantly the majority of properties within that zone are located adjacent to the state highway system. So ITD is going to have control, and they
Of the
could
highway
require
access,
their
they'll push it out.
the access anyway. There's a new use that's being proposed. They would have to get go through all the steps that ITD requires, which may include a traffic impact study if the use is so large. But they would have control of the highway system. So even if we had that language in there, they would ultimately have control, and we wouldn't. Basically.
Okay. So anyway, I'm hearing this comment from the citizen, and I'm looking and I say, I think there's a difference between the two zones, and wondering about adding that language.
How much of general business is in fact
On the
state highway?
Probably just the portion of Gritman. Gritman
Yeah.
probably is
But
the
that's-
largest general
that's-
business. You have one side that's state highway.
Main Street is
yeah.
not. But
Yeah, the rest of them, the courthouse, Presbyterian Church, 1912 Center, all those properties are general business, but we don't have a whole lot of general business in town. It's predominantly the
Right.
Gritman and
Gritman
those
campus
properties.
and just to the east of it.
Yeah. So they would border, Gritman properties would border Washington on one side, but that would be it.
Okay. With those comments, I'll entertain the motion to carry on. So I think what we're really doing is saying we would like to schedule this for public hearing.
Okay, next day would be, or next meeting would be February 11th.
Okay.
So I'll get that queued up.
Okay.
Would you
Great.
like to see it one more time with possibly that, is that what I was hearing?
You
Correct.
could bring that to the meeting of the 20.
And possibly some language about, just in general business, about traffic? Okay.
That would be my request, and you brought it to the meeting of the 28th of January.
Sure.
You could stay on schedule.
Sure.
you include that in your motion.
Consider it included.
Consider it all included. And
Almost perfect.
all in favor, say
Potentially
aye.
perfect.
All right, we're going to carry on. Great. Mike, you are up again under temporary use discussion.
Just wanted to briefly talk about temporary uses in town. I had brought this to administrative committee a few weeks ago to discuss whether or not council thought it was worthy of exploring, and they did. And so I wanted to work with the commission to bring forth an ordinance and kind of fine tune. But I wanted to start out with a little bit of background about what we're talking about. Temporary sales display stands, commonly referred to as temporary uses by other jurisdictions, but you've seen them probably around town at various times. Christmas tree stands. It's just mainly these temporary sales stands that show up seasonally, or just basically at a temporary
Sunglasses,
basis.
Christmas trees.
Fireworks stands that show up around the 4th of July, sunglass stands, produce stands, blanket stands. And currently we don't have temporary uses defined within the zoning code anywhere. have temporary structures defined, but not necessarily temporary uses. And generally, if they're located within a zone that allows that type of use, retail sales, then generally they would be allowed under most commercial zones. And so we haven't run into really any issues up to probably about this last year. We had a couple of them that were noteworthy. We had a fireworks stand which was located within a residential zoning district on an undeveloped lot. And it presented a little bit of challenges because it was located right at a kind of a busy intersection. We have residential zones that don't allow retail sales, so that is one of the major issues.
Where was that?
Southwest corner of Mountain View and 6, I believe, is where that one was. Just a triangular shaped vacant piece of property. We had a little bit of access just because the proximity to that busy intersection with parking and access. Ended up having them go out there and put a temporary fencing in to delineate where to enter, where to exit, and a little bit of parking. We also had a produce stand that was located close to the south couplet that was coming Friday, Saturday, Sunday, basically every weekend within the summer. And that was also located, adjacent to Jackson Street there at that busy intersection. The south couplet kind of have access points that were undefined there. Saw a lot of people entering from the Kreitz property and driving all the way across the property because they didn't understand there was another curb cut further south that they could use for access. Really didn't run into any issue, a whole lot of issues with mud. But if we would have had some, rains generated, there would have been a lot of just messy, tracking mud, dirt onto the public right-of-way and the street system. Also, tendency for dust to be kicked up, just because of the undeveloped nature of the property that they had chose. And then just poor circulation, really, undefined circulation on the site. And so we had taken a look at how other jurisdictions dealt with temporary uses, looked at Boise, Post Falls, Spokane, Eugene, LeGrand, Oregon, and most require temporary use permits to review. And they wanted to look at things like the vision triangle. So, if it's located at an intersection, we're going to present a safety hazard from where maybe the temporary structure is located, or if you had parking out there that was going to prohibit some type of vision. Most required them to just, cater to the existing setbacks or comply with the existing setbacks of the underlying zoning district that they were located in, so you weren't too close to property lines. And taking a look at circulation on the site, whether or not that was going to be an issue, parking, access points, making sure that they had defined access points and those were going to work without causing nuisances, and also taking a look at how long they were going to be there, as well as the appropriate zoning district for that type of use. And so the potential approach that really staff had defined at this point was to get a definition for temporary uses within the zoning code, since we currently don't define it. Have a temporary use permit which would be exempt for developed sites, because if you look at a lot of these issues, it's mainly just for the undeveloped sites. You have a existing parking lot, Rosars, the fireworks stands are there. Obviously, they have curb cuts, they have all the access points, they have a parking lot. Really no issues to speak of up to this point, only the undeveloped properties. So we would exempt those out and just require a temporary use permit for the undeveloped sites, just to review those things that we just discussed, the things that can be real nuisance issues. Also, as we were having kind of the sidewalk vendor discussion a couple months ago at City Council, the city attorney was discussing, handling of food trucks within the public right-of-way. And we don't really address them on private property. And so I think that we'd probably just look at doing the same process as we would for some of these temporary sales displays. Just look at, if they were on developed property, not require a permit, And if they were on undeveloped property, just make sure they were, had a plan and they were going to abide by and comply with those aspects that are listed above. But we wouldn't classify them as temporary uses. They could possibly be defined on their own and just cover those aspects. And so that was really the approach that we had come up with. And so just wanted to talk a little bit briefly about that and see if anybody else had any, commission had any issues with that or any other direction they thought that we should head.
So, do they have to get a permit to sell things in Moscow? Is there a vendor permit? Or?
I don't believe so right now. I mean, we don't have business licensing, so we don't require businesses to get a license. Usually, if it's like a fireworks display stand, they would have to get a permit through fire department, just because of the explosive, product. But as long as they're not in the public right of way, they're not required to get a permit.
The other question I had, I'm remembering back to our urban garden ordinance, and I believe for certain situations they would be able to set up a farm stand on one of these urban gardens. Would that be covered under this?
It wouldn't be. It'd be covered under our urban agricultural ordinance.
So should it be specifically exempted here?
Well, typically we allow those retail sales, but the farm actually has to be located on site.
Yeah.
So it'd have to be a market garden, and then you can get usually it's a conditional use permit to be able to have a retail sales display stand.
Yeah.
But there's the restriction there that it has to be located on the same property as the market garden.
Because it's not.
So
not
if
really
it was,
developed.
if it was a produce stand that wasn't associated with a market garden, it wouldn't meet that definition, but it would be covered under possibly this definition of temporary uses.
Okay.
But good on you to remember that other.
Is a farmer's market a temporary use?
No.
In the sense of, the council has spoken, we can do this regardless of what it is.
This is only on private property.
Private property. And the farmer's market, was it parking lot?
Yeah, it's on public property.
Public
That was
property.
city-owned property.
That was public property.
Yep.
Ooh, good point.
But thank you. And Kurt, did you have a? Oh, okay.
Kurt got real quiet.
I just had a question. I mean, in some ways, I can see the point of this. In some ways, it also sounds like it might be a solution looking for a problem at this point. The fireworks stand, I think you said that was a retail use in a residential zone which would not be allowed?
Correct. Yeah, it was a commercial use, and it just so happened that property was zoned residential, and so it wasn't allowed. What happened was they had gone through the fire department, and on their form, there's nothing to do with zoning and the zoning code, and so they were allowed to remain throughout the, because they had already set up the stand, had all their inventory and everything, and so we allowed them to remain on site through the end, but let them know that next year they needed to be located in a zone that would allow that use, and so that's what we had done with that one.
I thought the one, in fact, I even stopped and took a photo of it at one point, the produce operation down there at the South Couplet. It just seemed like it was very challenging for a shopper to get there, know how to get there, to find that curb cut, and then the transition to, it was just such an ill-defined space where they were that I thought maybe it hasn't become a problem yet, but it looked like it was adding complexity to an already complex traffic area by adding that stand.
Yeah, it seemed weird, didn't it? It was difficult, but then people are gone so rapidly, and then people are trying to figure out where to turn. But I think, as Michael says, most of these things show up in a developed area where we have legitimate curb cuts, and they're not in other places. But I'm kind of like Greg. I would like some undisciplined things to be able to happen in our environment on occasion, and I don't certainly want dangerous things, but on the other hand, I worry sometimes about trying to control every little thing, because unique things happen in unique ways, and I don't think we should spend a lot of time trying to predict what the unique things that we don't know about. So I don't know. I'm not overly worried about it. But that one, I must say that I worried about those people trying to slow down and buy a melon and get smacked.
Getting in there
Yeah.
doesn't impress me as too much of a problem, but getting out, unless you wanted to go down South Main for Lewiston, would have been the problem.
Yeah. So, I guess, first thought, presumably the landowner had permitted it.
Correct.
Okay. Second thought is administrative committee has thought we ought to pay attention to this issue, correct?
Yeah, just to take a look at it. I mean, we had basically gave the same presentation and thought that the approach was good and warranted, just to exempt out the developed sites, but take a look at, requiring a temporary use permit just for the undeveloped sites. We don't have that many in town that are in the commercial zoning district that are undeveloped, and so I doubt that you'd even get that many, temporary use permits coming in, except for if the, melon guy comes back next year. And the majority of these, it still allows for creativity and, whatever pops up, as long as it's a commercial use, it certainly can, and they don't have to come and talk to us and get
I
a
can
permit.
be instructed by
so.
the administrative committee. I'm okay.
So, pay attention to the. So,
Is there any alternative way of controlling things like the one on the South Couplet? Because this does seem like perhaps a bit of overkill, but
I would think, speaking to that, actually, if the person or people that put that up were a little bit better business people and better marketers, they would have delineated. Come in here,
right, big enter sign.
put enter for your melons or something, and I don't think we'd even be talking about that if they had done that, to come in here and then leave here and you're ready to go.
Yeah, this seems to me like this is mainly a dangerous traffic idiot permit. Yeah, and just to make sure that people don't.
Well, they weren't from
Cause
around
hazards.
here, so I think you don't understand what the traffic patterns are in a place that's not your home. So it's a way of saying, you could be there, but here are the constraints of the location,
Yeah,
and in order to keep it safe and convenient and all that, it's more of a helpful thing in my mind and I would presume it would not be some expensive process to get the permit.
On the other, since there are relatively few sites, and this one is owned by an institution that is a good community member, is there a different approach, which is to go around to a few of those landowners and say, hey, how about just not doing that, not allowing that, and then we don't need regulations, it just doesn't happen because the landowner doesn't give permission.
Well, I think that, the zoning district that they're in would allow those types of uses, and I think it's of value to the community to have those uses. It's just nice to be able to review them for safety and to not cause, issues of concern with the public. So.
So the pleasure of the committee is to listen to the instruction of the admin committee and direct staff to help us nudge something forward.
I would say keep it uncomplicated, though.
Sure.
Sure.
All right. We got our instruction, you got yours, Mike.
Okay.
Anything else that you wish to share before we adjourn?
I'll just share one thing with you, totally off this topic. Relative to the space that we're in and the building that we're in, I'm involved with a group. Wendy is also in this group of selecting the 100 or a list of 100 of the most relevant, most important buildings in the state of Idaho. And it hasn't been an easy task. We've been working on this for about a year, and this is working with an agency out of Chicago, the Society of Architectural Historians. But I just will mention that we sent in our first 11 buildings to Chicago Monday, and this building is one of those buildings on the list. So this will be, what?
Is the 1912 on it?
Actually, it is. I could talk more about it, but I just wanted to say that this building is one of the finest buildings in Moscow by all our accords, and I'd be happy to give you all a copy of it or send it to you if you'd like. But I just think that sitting in this room, in this wonderful oak-paneled room, you know, we've been blessed over the last years to have a building like this that we can call our own here in Moscow. It's a wonderful place, and so anyway, I'm happy. I've started to retire again. I've been really up against a wall for the last 2 or 3 weeks, getting some of this stuff ready to send. We have rules about when we have to send stuff in, so by May 30th we have to have 50 buildings in. But this was, let's see, I think this was the only public building in Moscow that we've put in at this moment. We have other buildings on campus, and we have the 1912, even though I have to tell you that I wasn't as certain about it. We pulled a lot of hair over getting this list together. But I know the library went on this. We sent in the library, so the library and its addition and this building are the 2 public buildings that went in at this time. So you should be proud of being in this place.
I would certainly agree that this hall here is a much more impressive place for planning and zoning to meet and for city council to meet than the large hall in what is now the police station.
Yes.
Which is where we met for many years.
I know. I was going to say that and then I realized that you had to endure the pain of that for a few years. I didn't have to do that. We were already moved in here when I came on board.
All right. Thank you for that. And with that, we're adjourned.